Betrayed and alone, Ava begged a stranger to save her. What she didn't know was that she wasn't asking for a simple marriage, but for a bond that could never be broken. The man she trusted turned out to be the Alpha King, the most dangerous man in the realm. Now, trapped in his world, can Ava escape the consequences of her choices? Or is she already lost? Before we begin, are you watching from London? New York? Wherever you are, you found this story for a reason. If Ava's fight resonates with you, don't just watch and leave.
Subscribe.
It costs you nothing but means everything. You can binge hours of content, but can't click one button to support stories that actually matter? Be part of something real.
Hit subscribe.
Let's grow together. The decision to run had not been born of courage. It had been born of the slow suffocation that comes when every choice is made for you. Ava stood before the tarnished mirror, braiding her dark hair with trembling fingers. The reflection staring back seemed to belong to someone else. Eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, skin drained of color, jaw clenched with desperation disguised as determination. In 5 days, I will belong to Duke Former. 5 days until her father would present her to a man whose reputation preceded him like a funeral march. She could still feel his gaze from the betrothal ceremony, traveling over her body as though appraising livestock. His hand lingering on her wrist, gripped just tight enough to remind her that soon she would have no right to pull away. You will endure this. Many women endure worse. But endurance was not living. And Ava had tasted what it meant to truly live during those stolen months with Thomas. Thomas laughing with her in the market square. Thomas whispering promises in the shadows. Thomas writing letters she kept hidden, words that made her believe she could be more than what her father had designed her to be. "Run away with me," he had written. "I will find a way for us. Trust me, Ava." And she had trusted him with every desperate, naive part of herself. Footsteps in the corridor. Mira, the kitchen maid, slipped into the room. "The guards change in 40 minutes, Mira whispered. "You'll have maybe 10 minutes to get through the servants' entrance. 10 minutes between imprisonment and freedom. And Thomas, he'll be waiting at the inn." Relief and anxiety tangled in Ava's chest. The leather pouch beneath her cloak held everything she owned. "I will give it all to him. Because without Thomas, this gold means nothing." "There's still time to reconsider," Mira said softly. "I have to try to choose my own future." Mira nodded, tears gathering. "Then may it lead you somewhere true." Ava had spent 20 years being molded for this exact transaction. Lord Ravenhill was not cruel in obvious ways, but his ambition was cold and absolute. His only daughter had always been a strategic asset to be deployed when the moment was right. That her heart belonged to someone else had never mattered. "It's time, Miss Ava." Ava followed Mira through silent corridors to the servants' passages hidden behind a faded tapestry. She stepped into darkness, moving through narrow, suffocating tunnels until they opened to a hidden exit. Night air hit her like cold water. The road into town was empty. The inn appeared exactly where it should, warm light spilling from its windows. Then she heard voices from the alley beside it. Thomas's voice. Honestly thought she'd figure it out sooner. But she's so desperate to believe someone actually wants her that she swallowed every word. Another voice, rougher. "And the dowry? Once we're married, I'll have legal access to everything. Give it a month, then I'll disappear. She'll be stuck with the scandal, and I'll be halfway to the southern ports." Ugly laughter. "What about the girl? Ava? She's powerless. She'll keep quiet out of pure shame." Something inside Ava shattered. Not her heart. Something deeper. The last fragile belief that someone had seen her as more than a transaction. "He never loved me." She turned and ran, boots slapping cobblestones. She ran blindly into the maze of alleys, vision blurring. She collided with someone. Ava stumbled backward. The figure in the shadows didn't move, just stood there, a dark silhouette.
Tall.
Still. Watching her with intensity, she could feel. The stranger spoke first, voice low and measured. "You're running from something." Not a question. She had nothing left.
No lo ver.
No home. No future that didn't end with Duke Vortimer. "I need your help." "What kind of help?" "I need you to marry me." Silence. The stranger stepped into weak light. Dark hair. Strong features. Eyes that seemed to see through every wall she'd ever built. He looked at her with recognition, as though he'd been expecting her. "Marriage," he repeated. "I have money." Her hands shook as she pulled out the pouch. "Everything I own. I just need protection. I need to not be alone." His gaze moved from the pouch to her face. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "I don't care. Please, just say yes." The stranger closed her fingers around the pouch, pushing it back. "Keep your gold." Her heart plummeted. "But I accept." She blinked. "What?" "I accept your offer. But not for your wealth. What you're asking for is far more permanent than you realize. Once you agree, there is no walking away." Behind her was betrayal. Ahead was Duke Vortimer. Here was her only escape. "I agree," she whispered. "Then it's done." He extended his hand. Trembling, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Something shifted between them, something she couldn't name but could feel in her bones. A connection that went deeper than words. "My name is Rainer." The way he said it made her breath catch. She didn't know she had just bound herself to the Alpha King of a hidden realm. She didn't know the bond forming between them was older than human marriage, utterly unbreakable. She didn't know her desperate choice had just changed the fate of kingdoms. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone was holding her hand and not letting go. And somehow that was enough. Rainer's hand was still warm around hers when the weight of what she'd done began to settle. But there was no time to question it. Behind them, voices echoed from the main street. Searching voices. "We should move," Rainer said, his tone calm but absolute. Ava nodded, numb, and let him lead her deeper into the maze of alleys, away from the inn where Thomas's laughter still rang in her ears like a curse. Every step felt both like escape and like falling. She had run from one trap only to walk willingly into another, and the stranger beside her, this man who called himself Rainer, was either her salvation or her destruction. She didn't know which yet. She wasn't sure it mattered. They stopped in the shadow of an abandoned storehouse, far enough from the town center that the sounds of the night market faded to nothing. Rainer released her hand, and Ava immediately felt the absence of that steady warmth. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite her cloak. "You heard something," Rainer said. Not a question. He seemed to speak only in certainties. Ava's throat tightened. She didn't want to say it aloud. Saying it would make it real, would cement the humiliation into something she could never take back. But the words came anyway, bitter and broken. "I heard him. Thomas. The man I thought." She stopped, swallowed hard. "He was planning to take my dowry and leave.
It was never about me."
It was never real." Rainer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. Something closer to recognition, as though he'd seen this story play out 1,000 times before. "Love that requires desperation is not love," he said quietly. "It's exploitation dressed in pretty words." The simple truth of it hit Ava harder than the betrayal itself. Thomas had seen her vulnerability and weaponized it. He had love-bombed her with promises and passion, knowing she was trapped, knowing she would cling to anything that felt like freedom. And she had fallen for it completely because when survival is at stake, hope becomes a drug you cannot refuse. I was so stupid, she whispered. You were powerless, Raynor corrected. There's a difference. Ava looked up at him. This stranger who had agreed to marry her for reasons she still didn't understand. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, impossible to read. What do you want from me? She asked, voice barely audible. If not my gold, then what? Raynor held her gaze, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of an oath. What I want is for you to understand what you've agreed to, and then decide if you can live with it. Ava's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them against her sides, trying to steady herself, trying to think through the fog of shock and betrayal. The abandoned storehouse smelled of dust and old grain, and the silence between them stretched until it felt like a living thing. Raynor moved to lean against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with that unnerving stillness. He didn't offer comfort, didn't try to fill the silence with empty reassurances. He simply waited, as though he had all the time in the world. I don't understand, Ava finally said, her voice raw. You don't know me. You don't want my money. So, why would you agree to this? Because you asked. The simplicity of it should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her more uneasy. People didn't help strangers out of pure goodwill, especially not desperate women fleeing in the night. There was always a cost, always a reason. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm giving you tonight. Ava's frustration flared, cutting through the numbness. You said I need to understand what I've agreed to. Then tell me. What did I agree to? Raynor pushed off from the wall, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. Ava's breath caught. Up close, he was even more imposing than she'd realized. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Broad-shouldered, radiating a kind of contained power that made the air feel heavier. But he didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just stood there, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the sharp line of his jaw. You offered yourself to me, he said, voice low. Not just your wealth, not just a legal contract. You, Ava. And I accepted. What we have now is not a human marriage. It's something older, something binding. Binding, she repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. A claiming bond. It cannot be undone by law or distance or desire. Once sealed, it is permanent. The implication hit her like cold water. We're not. It's not sealed yet?
No.
Not yet. Relief and terror warred in her chest. Then I can still. You can, Raynor interrupted. You can walk away right now. Return to your father. Face Duke Vortimer. Accept the life you are running from. His gaze held hers unwavering. Or you can choose this.
Choose me.
But understand, Ava, if you make this choice, there is no going back. The word hung between them like a blade.
Permanent.
Ava's mind raced. A claiming bond. Something older than human marriage. She had stumbled into a world she didn't understand, made a bargain with rules she hadn't known existed. You should have told me, she said, anger rising. Before I agreed. You should have. Would you have believed me? Raynor's tone was matter-of-fact, not defensive. If I had told you in that alley that I was not human, that the bond one offered was supernatural and irreversible, would you have trusted me? Or would you have run? Ava opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She would have thought him mad. Or dangerous. She would have run. Straight back into the arms of her father's guards, or worse. That's not fair, she whispered. No, Raynor agreed. It's not. But fairness is a luxury neither of us had in that moment. You needed escape. I offered it. The terms were simply more complex than you understood. The asymmetry of it struck her like a physical blow. He had held all the knowledge, all the power, while she had been blind and desperate. Consent given without full understanding. Was it truly consent at all? What are you? The question came out smaller than she intended. I am the Alpha King of the werewolf realm. My people exist in the spaces between your world and ours, unseen but always present. Werewolf. The word should have sounded absurd. Instead, it explained the predatory stillness, the ancient quality in his gaze, the sense that he was holding back something vast and dangerous. And this bond, Ava said slowly, what does it do? It marks you as mine, protects you under my law, binds your life to mine in ways that go deeper than marriage vows.
He paused.
It means I will always know where you are, always feel when you're in danger, and you will feel the same for me. Never alone, never free. And if I refuse now, if I say I want to leave, then you leave. I will not force you, Ava. But Duke Vortimer will still be waiting. Your father will still hand you over. Thomas will still betray you. His expression softened, just slightly. The bond offers protection, but it also offers cage. The choice is yours. Safety and captivity, she realized, were not opposites. They were often the same thing, wrapped in different words. Ava stood frozen, the weight of Raynor's words pressing down on her like stone. Safety and captivity. Protection and prison. The bond he offered was both, and she had mere moments to decide which she could live with. Behind her lay everything she knew, the suffocation of her father's house, the brutality of Duke Vortimer, the shame of Thomas's betrayal. Ahead lay the unknown, a supernatural bond, a king she didn't understand, a world that existed in shadows. Neither choice offered freedom, only different forms of survival. If I agree, she said carefully, can I negotiate terms? Something flickered in Raynor's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise. Such as, you said the bond is permanent, but what about my autonomy, my choices within it? You would remain yourself. I have no interest in a mindless possession. His tone was firm. But you would be bound to my protection, which means bound to my world. There will be rules, dangers you'll need to understand, enemies who'll see you as leverage. So, I trade one cage for another. Yes, Raynor said bluntly, but in this cage, you have a voice, power, once you learn to wield it, and no one will touch you without answering to me. The promise in those last words was absolute, violent even. Duke Vortimer was brutal, but his cruelty was sanctioned by law and custom. Raynor's protection existed outside those structures entirely, which made it both more dangerous and more real. Ava thought of her father's cold calculations, of Duke Vortimer's possessive grip, of Thomas's casual mockery. Men who had used her powerlessness as a weapon. At least Raynor was honest about the cage. I accept, she said, the words steady despite the fear coursing through her. I accept the bond. Raynor studied her for a long moment, as though searching for hesitation, for doubt. Then he nodded once, final and binding as an oath. Then we seal it now. He extended his hand, palm up. Not a request. An invitation to step across a threshold she could never return from. Ava placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and the world shifted. Heat rushed through her veins, not painful but overwhelming, as though something ancient and primal had recognized her and claimed her as its own. She gasped, her knees buckling, but Raynor's other hand caught her waist, steadying her. Breathe, he commanded softly. Let it settle. The sensation intensified. She could feel him, not just his physical presence, but something deeper. His heartbeat.
His breath.
The controlled power thrumming beneath his skin. And beneath that, something vast and wild and utterly inhuman. When it finally subsided, Ava found herself leaning against his chest, his arms still around her waist, her hand still clasped in his. "It's done," Raynor said quietly. "You are mine now, and I am yours." The bond hummed between them, undeniable and eternal. And Ava realized, with crystalline clarity, that she had just changed the fate of more than just herself. 3 days after the bond was sealed, Ava stood in the grand hall of Raynor's estate, watching as people she had never seen before bowed to the man beside her. She had thought the storehouse was where their story would remain, hidden in shadows and secrecy. She had been wrong. Raynor had brought her to his stronghold at dawn, a sprawling manor that existed in some impossible space between the human world and his own. The architecture was strange, too old and too elegant, with corridors that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the people who shocked her most. Dozens of them, moving through the halls with purpose and deference. Servants, advisors, guards. All of them supernatural. All of them bowing when Raynor passed. And now, in this hall filled with his court, they bowed to her too. Ava stood rigid beside Raynor's throne, a chair of dark wood and silver that seemed to command the room by its mere presence. She wore a dress his people had provided, deep green silk that felt foreign against her skin. Everything felt foreign. The eyes on her, the whispers, the weight of what she had become. Raynor's mate. The Alpha Queen, they called her, though she had no idea what that meant. "You don't have to bow," she had whispered to a young woman who had curtsied so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. The woman had looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "But you are the queen, my lady. We must."
Queen.
The word sat wrong in her mouth. She was not a queen. She was a desperate girl who had made a desperate choice. But Raynor's hand had found hers, his grip steady and grounding. "They bow because you are bound to me, because my authority is now yours. You will learn to carry it." She hadn't responded. Couldn't. Because the absurdity of it was too vast. She had offered her dowry to a stranger in an alley, and that stranger had turned out to be a king. Now, standing in his court, watching his people treat her with reverence she hadn't earned, Ava felt the full weight of her ignorance crash over her. "You should have told me," she said, her voice low enough that only Raynor could hear. "Would it have changed your choice?"
Yes. No.
"I don't know." She turned to look at him, anger and humiliation burning in her chest. "You let me offer you gold. You let me beg. You knew who you were, and you let me humiliate myself." Raynor's expression remained calm, unreadable. "You were not humiliating yourself. You were negotiating for your survival. There is no shame in that. But you had all the power, and I had none. You could have. I could have told you I was a king, and you would have thought me mad or dangerous. I could have revealed my nature, and you would have run." His gaze held hers unflinching. "I gave you the choice you could actually make in that moment. Anything else would have been cruelty." Before Ava could respond, the heavy doors of the hall burst open. Guards entered first, human guards wearing the crimson and gold of the Northern Territories. Behind them strode a man Ava recognized instantly, though every part of her wished she didn't. Duke Former. He was exactly as she remembered. Tall, broad, silver-haired, with a face that might have been handsome once but had been hardened by cruelty into something cold and brutal. His eyes swept the hall with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. Those eyes found her, and his expression shifted into something possessive and triumphant. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying across the hall like a pronouncement. "Lord Ravenhill has been searching frantically. We all have." Ava's breath caught. Her father had sent him. Of course he had. Raynor stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His court went utterly still, predators sensing threat. "You are in my hall," Raynor said, his voice quiet but laced with unmistakable authority. "You will address me before you address anyone else." Vortimer's gaze finally shifted to Raynor, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. But arrogance won out. "And you are?" Vortimer asked dismissively. "King Raynor of the Werewolf realm. And the woman you are looking at is my mate." The word mate hung in the air like a blade. Vortimer's expression darkened.
Impossible.
"She is betrothed to me by legal contract. Her father does not rule here," Raynor interrupted. "Your human laws do not reach into my domain. She is mine by bond, by choice, and by right. You have no claim." Vortimer's face flushed red. "She is a child who ran away in foolish panic. This arrangement, whatever you call it, is invalid. I have come to take her home." Ava felt the words like a physical blow. A child. Foolish. As though her desperate escape had been nothing more than a tantrum. Raynor's hand moved to his side, and Ava realized with sharp clarity that he was restraining himself. The air around him felt charged, dangerous. One word from her, and he would destroy Vortimer where he stood. But that wasn't what she wanted. Not violence. Not Raynor fighting her battles while she stood silent and powerless. She had been powerless her entire life. She was done with it. Ava stepped forward, away from Raynor's side, her voice clear and steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I am not going anywhere with you, Duke Vortimer." The hall went silent. Vortimer's eyes narrowed. "Girl, you do not understand the consequences of—" "I understand perfectly," Ava interrupted, her voice stronger now. "I understand that you see me as property to be acquired, that my father sees me as a political tool, that neither of you ever asked what I wanted." She took another step forward. "I made my choice. I chose this bond. I chose King Raynor, and I will not be taken back to a life where I have no voice." Vortimer's expression twisted into fury. "You have no authority to make such a choice. Your father—" "My father sold me to you without my consent," Ava said, and the truth of it rang through the hall. "That contract was made without my agreement, which makes it void in any court that recognizes a woman's right to refuse." Vortimer stepped toward her, menace radiating from him. "You think you have rights? You think—" Raynor moved between them in an instant, his presence a wall of controlled violence. "Touch her," Raynor said softly, "and I will show you what rights truly mean in this realm." Vortimer froze, his face pale. For the first time, Ava saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of consequence or scandal, but primal fear of something far stronger than him. "This is an outrage," Vortimer said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I will take this to the king. I will bring an army." "Bring whatever you wish," Raynor said, his tone devoid of emotion. "But you will not take her. She has made her choice publicly, before witnesses. By werewolf law, and by the bond we share, she is beyond your reach. Human law does not apply here." Raynor's eyes glowed briefly, a flash of gold that made Vortimer stumble backward. "You entered my territory uninvited, made demands of my mate, and threatened violence. I could end you, for far less. Consider the fact that you still draw breath as my only act of mercy today." The guards behind Vortimer shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons they would never be fast enough to draw. But it was Ava who spoke next, her voice cutting through the tension. Duke Vortimer, you came here believing you had the right to reclaim me. You don't. You never did. The betrothal my father arranged was made without my consent, which means it was made without legal standing in any realm that recognizes a woman's autonomy. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. I will not be returning with you.
Not now.
Not ever. If my father wishes to contest this, tell him his daughter is no longer his to barter. The finality in her words left no room for argument. Vortimer's jaw clenched, rage and humiliation warring across his face. But he was not stupid. He could see he was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and very much at risk of not leaving this hall alive. This is not over, he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Yes, Ava said quietly, it is. Raynor gestured to his guards. Escort Duke Vortimer to the border. Make certain he understands that if he returns, there will be no second warning. The guards moved forward, and Vortimer had no choice but to retreat, his crimson cloak sweeping behind him as he was led from the hall. Only when the doors closed did Ava allow herself to breathe. Her legs trembled. Her hands shook. But she had done it. She had stood before the man who was meant to own her and claimed her own voice. Raynor's hand found her shoulder, steady and grounding. Well spoken, he said quietly. Ava turned to look at him, searching his face for judgment or disappointment. Instead, she found something close to respect. I didn't hide behind you, she said.
No.
You didn't. His expression softened slightly. You stood your ground. That takes more courage than most possess. The bond between them hummed, warm and certain, and for the first time since she'd agreed to it, Ava didn't feel trapped. She felt seen. The weeks following Vortimer's dismissal were not easy. Ava had expected the bond to fade into background noise, something she would learn to tolerate like a chronic ache. Instead, it remained vivid and demanding. She felt Raynor's presence constantly, a steady thrum at the edge of her consciousness. His moods, his movements, the weight of his authority pressing against her own emerging sense of self. And she knew he felt her too. Every moment of doubt, every flash of anger, every time she woke gasping from nightmares of her father's house or Thomas's mocking laughter. The bond would never disappear. That truth settled over her like stones, heavy and permanent. But permanence, she was learning, did not mean powerlessness. Ava began to study. She spent hours in Raynor's library, reading about werewolf law, pack hierarchies, the intricate politics that governed his realm. She asked questions, relentless and pointed, until his advisors grew accustomed to her presence in council meetings. She discovered weaknesses in traditions that limited her role, protocols designed to keep mates decorative rather than functional, rules that assumed she would be content to exist in Raynor's shadow. She negotiated. Slowly, carefully, she began carving out space for herself within the constraints of the bond. I want access to the treasury records, she told Raynor one evening. He looked up from the reports he was reviewing, one eyebrow raised. Why? Because if I'm to be queen, I should understand how resources are allocated. I should know where power flows and where it stagnates. A long pause. Then, granted. I want to sit in on trade negotiations with the human territories. You'll find them tedious. Then I'll be tediously informed. Raynor's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. Granted. Each negotiation was a small victory, a tiny expansion of autonomy within the cage. And Raynor, to her surprise, never denied her. He challenged her, pushed back when her requests were reckless or naive, but he never dismissed her outright. You respect resistance, she said one night, the observation surprising even herself. Raynor looked at her thoughtfully. I respect strength. Obedience, without thought, is weakness dressed as loyalty. You question because you think, I value that far more than blind compliance. The tension between her need for independence and the bond's pull never fully resolved. There were days she resented him for the choice he'd given her, days she felt the cage more than the safety, days she wondered if freedom was even possible when survival demanded compromise. But there were also days when she felt the power growing within her, the authority she was learning to wield, the voice she was learning to trust. And on those days, she understood. She would never be free in the way she'd once imagined. But she could be powerful. She could be heard. That would have to be enough. From desperate runaway to alpha queen, Ava's story proves that freedom isn't about breaking chains. It's about forging your own. If this journey moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about power and choice, subscribe for more stories that challenge, empower, and transform. Because the best stories don't just entertain, they teach us how to survive.